snackisen i matchinledningen på Bern Arena var inte det tama anfallsspelet, utan att domare Stefan Johannesson efter 20 minuter tog saken i egna händer när han justerade tillbaka målstolparna i rätt läge. IFK Göteborgs målstolpar i första halvlek. För titta vad IFKs målvakt Kim Christensen gjorde före avspark när han flyttade in stolparna och alltså förkortade mållinjen. Men någon direkt påföljd mot Christensen och Göteborg blev det inte. Domare Johannesson checkade även ÖSKs målstolpar. Hemmalagets John Alvbåge klart nöjd med att bli godkänd.
What does this smart ass do in the video? That's right, he minimizes the risks of missing a goal. Looks cowardly and unfair and not at all sporty, doesn't it? Moving the goalposts, or shifting the goalposts, is an idiom based on a metaphor, and it is derived from goal-based sports, which means to change the criteria, goal of a process or competition, while it is still in progress, in such a way that the new goal offers one side an advantage or disadvantage. In the video clip, we witness Danish goalkeeper Kim Christensen moving the goalposts in order to gain advantage over the opposing team. It happened in 2009. The trick was discovered by the referee about 20 minutes into the game, but Christensen didn't suffer a suspension or any fines for his actions. What's more, later on, Christensen said that he'd done the same thing before several other games. This is how a funny sports episode gave birth to a new video.
This values debate has shown itself to be extremely useful to the GOP for decades, and they are very adept at moving the goalposts when it's necessary.
To be a truly advanced, sophisticated democracy, you need an opposition party that knows how to react to good news by sounding whiny and grudging and moving the goalposts.
History knows many examples that illustrate this phrase. Once upon a time in the Soviet Union, it was forbidden by law to own, or even more so, to make transactions with foreign currencies. Clever guys who were called fartsovshiks were engaged in such cases. This word comes from the distorted English for sale.
Do you have anything for sale?
They made money by reselling scarce imported goods that were difficult to access or completely inaccessible to an ordinary Soviet citizen. Most often the items of supply and demand of the fartsovka were clothes and accessories. Vinyl records, audio cassettes, reels, cosmetics and stuff like this were also popular. The fartsovshiks were mainly young people, students, as well as those who, by the nature of their activities, had the opportunity to communicate closely with foreigners, guides, interpreters, taxi drivers, prostitutes, you name it. They established international economic ties with the Yugos, Yugoslavs, Bundes, Germans, Dedirones, immigrants from the German Democratic Republic, DDR, in German, the States, the British, Phoenix from Finland, and so on.
Лето 57-го. В Москве проходит Всемирный фестиваль молодежи и студентов. Впервые за всю историю Советского Союза в страну приезжают столько иностранцев. А вместе с зарубежными гостями к нам попадают буржуазные ценности.
И вдруг наши увидели, что можно ходить в шортах. И что половина молодежи ходит в джинсах. И что носят майки, которых у нас невозможно вообще в голову не было. Вот майка, где-то что-то там написано.
Праздник мира и дружбы длится всего 2 недели. Но этого достаточно, чтобы в Советском Союзе появилась фарцовка.
Это охотники за заграничным тряпьем, фарцовщики. Порой кажется, ну что здесь такого? Подумаешь, мальчишки перекупают у иностранцев барахло. Но фарцовщики лишь начинают с заграничных этикеток, а кончают опасной черной тропой.
иностранцу подходили вежливые молодые люди и предлагали бесплатный презент ради дружбы. Ну, к примеру, по такую матрешку или набор значков. В ответ нередко получали настоящую жвачку или авторучку. Потом иностранного друга просили продать что-нибудь из одежды на память. Фартовщики скупали все. Не брезговали иногда даже ношенным нижним бельем. Главное, что это фирма. Особым шиком были импортные сигареты. Терпкий вкус другой жизни.
Порой фартовщик соглашался обменять иностранцу по выгодному курсу валюту. И вот с этого момента любитель заграничных вещей мог оказаться под колпаком КГБ.
At the turn of the 50s and 60s of the last century, a high-profile case of the farsovщик Rokotov and companions broke out. First, they were sentenced to 8 years for fraud on a particularly large scale. But later, Khrushchev, at that time the ruler of the USSR, realized what a shortage, the total deficit of goods had brought the country to, and in what a magnificent palette the color of the shadow economy had blossomed. And he wanted a loud, edifying trial. As a result, the legislation was amended, and the accused were sentenced to death by firing squad. The case caused protests even among the investigators in the case, as it was a blatant violation of the fundamental principles of law in the form of the application of the law of retroactive force. The retroactivity of a law is the effect of a rule of law in relation to events that took place before the law came into force. The constitutions of many countries explicitly prohibit the use of the retroactive force of law, primarily in criminal law, in the case of establishing of previously non-existent liability or any tightening of previously existing liability. But you know, there are countries where the constitution itself, its key provisions, are adjusted so easily and light-mindedly, like a gate on a football field. The current leader extends the terms of the board for himself, guarantees himself complete immunity, and gives himself such extensive powers that it is unclear to whom this absolute power can be entrusted when he finally leaves. And how can you be so sure that in the hands of a new ruler with such extensive powers, the goalposts will not be moved again, and the rules of the game will not be rewritten, and the guarantor's guarantees and guarantees to the guarantor will not be zeroed out like the score on the board? There is another idea, at first glance about the same thing, but in fact about the opposite. A game changer. This is something new that alters traditional procedures or concepts. A game changer may be a new person, idea, event, or protocol that upends the established order. A game changer is a radical and even destructive shift, usually perceived in a positive way. The phrase game changer is a sports term that was adopted by the business community. Note that game changer is not hyphenated. The adjective form game changing is hyphenated.
I definitely think that Elon Musk is a game changer. He does not care about maintaining norms. He is focused on the future and creating the best version of it that he can. Look at all of the companies that he currently runs. SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, Boring Company, etc. Everything that he is doing within his companies is years ahead of others in this space. That consistency does not come by accident.
Yes, the best example of this, in my opinion, is his Neuralink company. Elon was doing interviews years ago where he was talking about the incredible things they would be able to do in just a few years' time. And they are already beginning to have working devices almost ready to fulfill his expectations. His Neuralink chips can already successfully interface with the brain and learn and interpret the brain signals that correspond to different actions.
Another game changer is political scientist Steven Pinker.
People are lousy intuitive scientists, too impressed by anecdotes and not impressed enough by data. As a result, relatively minor threats, like terrorists and spree shooters, consume vast amounts of attention and resources in our politics, while serious threats, like antibiotic resistance, are ignored. There are signs that this is changing, a growing awareness of research from the cognitive and behavioral sciences on the limits of intuition and moralization. The advent of big data. The success of Moneyball approaches to sports and election forecasts. The increased use of infographics and open-source datasets in the reporting of national and world trends. Let's hope it continues.
One way or another, both goalpost movers and radical game changers are aware and even desperately need changes. And being whether with impatient expectations or with fear and displeasure, everyone is faced with the need to make a choice. Which strategy and tactic suits you best?
Gonna keep on walking forward.